Hello, everyone. It's amazing being here. It's been a long time since my last talk at an academic conference, but I'm so glad to be here. Thank you to the committee for this amazing award, and of course, thank you for sticking around till the end. So this is the team that make that happen. And first thing first, let's start with this question. So this is the question I got asked many times, right? Where did your research start from, right? My research ended up being smartphone sensing. That's literally the title. And I say, okay, where is it coming from? Why did you end up doing that, right? And this is the origin. So for those who remember, or for those who are too young to remember, these are motes, little sensing creatures that the sensing community, actually the computer science community, some of the computer science community and the engineering community got nuts about it during the late 90s and early 2000, but mostly it was about exercising the networking stack. Lots of great work producing new protocols and so on. Not really many killer applications that elevated this technology to the next level. In fact, this is my testbed to the right, tabletop testbed. I was building a Mac protocol as part of my initial research. And at the end of the day, I decided, okay, let's do this, right? So the first day of my PhD, Andrew says, okay, let's go for a coffee. And okay, I said, okay, we're starting well. He's going to say something nice to me. But that's instead what he said. He said, well, if in 5 years nobody knows you for something you did, I think consider you a failure in the, as a PhD student. I said, all right, that's not a good start. But I said, okay, maybe I can do it. I mean, I think I'm a good student, I can do it. So I went on and started researching, and back then there was a website maintained by USC with all the literature about sensor networks. All you could find or all you could be interested in was in there. All the protocols, all the applications. And the problem is that as of early 2005, there were already tons of papers, maybe even thousands of papers, right? So, oh well, so you can imagine, right, the weight, the echo of those words, right, was growing and growing, right? So we decided that we needed to shift, right? We needed to do something different. So we started thinking, how do we do this? So we moved the modes from the table to the ceiling. So we started sticking in our department modes. Those are modes, nicely packaged compared to first generation. We were sensing stuff, I mean, collecting data mostly, right? So clearly with an accelerometer, you cannot sense much when this thing is stuck to the ceiling, right? But there was a primitive mic, there was a light sensor in there, so we started collecting data, but that exercise didn't excite us to a point that we decided to stay with it, right? So we said, well, we need just to keep thinking, right, and become more creative. So we started then strapping modes on people. So that's my partner in crime, Nick Lane. He's now a professor at Oxford University in the UK. And as you can see, we're strapping modes around everywhere, right? I mean, the wrists, the shoes, everywhere. So we were walking around like little geeks on campus. People thought we were crazy. But we started collecting data. This is our first mobile sensing application, if you can call it that way. And we said, okay, if you can do that with people on foot, you can do that with people on bikes. So we retrofitted bikes with a number of sensors to infer some of the things that could help us understand more about biking, how to collect pollution data in a town and so on. And this is what became BikeNet. That's me with a super tech helmet, right, for a 360 view video recording with a GPS on top. But at the end of the day, joking aside, right, so this was a critical exercise to evolve our thinking from tabletop sensing to something that would become eventually what we call people-centric, in everyday situation, everyday life. This was an important stepping stone. So then something really magical happened. So we are now at the end of 2016, early 17, and what was back then Nokia, the leader in mobile device manufacturing, pushed out these phones. They probably didn't even know what these phones were for. The first two on the left were called Sport phones. The one to the right was their flagship primitive smartphone. Of course, nothing to do with what you know about smartphones today. But these phones were the first phones in the market, not experimental devices, that had an accelerometer in it. And the rest is somewhat history. So that's when smartphone sensing, at least on our side, started. So we went from tabletop and ceiling-mounted sensing or people-strapped to something that became more people-centric because of the commodity devices that we carry every day that are smartphones. We said in 10 years from now, all the phones will have sensors on them, and a number of them, that we can leverage, that the community can leverage in a automated and local and continuous way. So this was a very different approach to using modes to sense the environment and other things or structural components. So in 2008, this was early 2008, we decided to start working on this crazy project called SenseMe. This is the first time where we took a phone and we started applying machine learning the way we could use it back then on those primitive devices, building an entirely phone-centered sensing system in a resource-efficient way to sense audio and activity through the accelerometer. We introduced what we call split-level classification, running partly machine learning, partly on the phone and partly on the cloud for larger context inferences that required the fusion of more data. But at the end of the day, this was really an interesting, very interesting experiment, because those Nokia devices were just using an operating system that was called Symbian. It was very hard to work with. None of the APIs were publicized. All of you that have hacked Android and iOS devices these days know how easy, quote unquote, it is. But this was a true leap of faith from our side. And we presented some results from a medium large scale experiment. So we decided, okay, let's give it a shot, let's put it out there. And we submitted it at Census 2008. So back then, still 99% of the papers were all about embedded sensing through modes or other custom hardware that was being presented. And again, for applications that were interesting, but really not what I would call mainstream these days. So some environmental stuff or some contrived audio sensing somewhere in different environments. And in fact, at the end of the day, only in the program, only 2 papers were about phones at this conference. And through what today is commonly called leaks, we figured that not many of the TPC members were happy about this paper in the conference. They said, this is a weird paper. And yeah, but nonetheless, we got in. We were the last talk of the conference, so it looks like it's the lucky spot. So these are some of the original slides of the talk. So we started exercising all the sensors. And by sensors, I mean not only the accelerometer, I'm talking about the camera, the Bluetooth, the GPS, the microphone, and so on, to infer different things that are related to physical activity, aggregating audio and activity to come up with social context, clustering GPS location data to come up with significant places. And the idea was to somewhat use this plumbing to automate some feeding to Facebook. In its infancy, they were providing APIs to publish stuff about things I'm doing, right? So the idea was, okay, if I'm in a meeting, maybe we don't want anybody to interrupt me, right? So I will just post the context that the phone infers by itself to Facebook. That was just, of course, a kind of a playground, right? The idea would be just to do that an auto text reply, like today you see on iOS or probably even on Android. If you're driving, you get a text saying, the person is driving, don't bother him. But that was the idea. Performance. These numbers were great back then. think about killing a phone after 6 hours today, right? But that was a major achievement. We're very proud of it. So lots of system work went into it. And we even published the app on the App Store the day of the launch of the store in July 2008. We were one of the 20 applications in the social networking category that got out there the day of the launch. That was pretty amazing. We got, number of downloads across the world. But bottom line, what I really want to say here is that a huge community from our work and others around that time just followed and bloomed, right? So that was a really, really remarkable shift in the sensing community. Think about what it was proceeding at UbiComp, Sensys, Mobisys, and MobiCom 10, 15, 12 years ago and what it is now, right? In terms of breakdown between what's phone-based or mobile sensing compared versus what is not. People started realizing that you don't need to strap sensors on researchers, starting realizing you need to strap sensors on people to sense stuff, to sense people, to collect data. Phones became the commodity device to conduct large-scale experiments, which many people do these days. Again, this seems obvious today. It wasn't obvious back then, and this progression towards, okay, accepting the idea of using phones for doing research was also a remarkable achievement. Very interesting work came out of it. Again, what is obvious today about finding native APIs to give you activity wasn't, of course, not obvious back then. Not that it was available. We just had access to the raw data, somehow going through several hoops by jailbreaking the phone, or in Symbian having to deal with prohibited APIs because it wasn't really easy to get to the sensors. But this is another remarkable achievement that happened over the years, that now you can just tap onto one of those APIs and just sit on top of a layer that abstracts the complications of all the underlying machine learning machinery. And clearly, we all know how many thousands of applications are out there on the commercial space, right? When it comes to sensing context, fitness, safety, right? So if there's anything, I think this community deserves a huge round of applause for somewhat fostering this process that eventually culminated with this remarkable success in the marketplace as well. I mean, it doesn't happen often from an academic community, and I have to say that this is probably the mobile sensing and wearables. It's probably one of the longest lived research threads, right, in the computer science history. So with this, I thank you again for the committee and you for being here. But if there's one takeaway that I want especially young PhD students to take today from this, is that sometimes you see a piece of meat there and you want to go for it, right? So that's what it's called, red waters, right? Lots of sharks are fighting for it, right? Don't do that. You may be crushed by another shark next to you. And that's not necessarily good. Just shoot for the blue ocean, where maybe at some point, someday you'll find a big prey, but it's all for you. So that was a very important lesson for me. Thank you.